Today is the beginning of a special week. It's World Interiors Day. A strange name for a rather important activity, the making of spaces and the remaking of environments, purpose specifically for human habitation. It's quite a momentous time for us also, as a group of academics who are deeply interested in making sure that there is an education and there is support for the best that we can provide in terms of the environment. And today, or should I say this evening, our director, Graham Brooker, has a few words to share with you.
I'm very sorry that I can't be there this evening. I'm actually over in Delft in Holland taking part in a conference and talking about interior stuff. But I wanted to make this short speech to show how important that I think this moment is and mark this event by welcoming you all and explaining some of the stuff that's going to go on this evening. This Saturday, the 25th of May, is World Interiors Day. People all around the world are celebrating inside space. Here in the United Kingdom, we thought that we would celebrate by initiating a series of interior educator events. The first event that we've organised is a small exhibition of the seminal works of the interior designers Ben Kelly, Julian Palmtuck and David Connor. This exhibition is taking place, will open on the 30th of May and will run for 2 weeks in the cafe on Upper Regent Street at the University of Westminster and has been curated by our first ever Interior Educators Fellow, Drew Plunkett. The exhibition runs for 2 weeks, and at our graduate show at Free Range in July in the Truman Brewery, the exhibition will be expanded substantially and added to, where we will develop our own archive of eminent practitioners. The second event that we are planning is a series of talks around London which will take place throughout the year and which will consist of eminent speakers drawn from practice, from the profession, from the discipline, from research, from education, who will start to develop the notion of what the interior is and the importance of the learned society. So more details on those events to follow when we have them, when they start to roll out. The third event is what brings us here today and is maybe the first and the most important event. As we are about to launch the Learned Society, we wanted to honour and induct professionals and educators who had made and who are still making a significant contribution to practice, education and research in this discipline. Tonight we would like to honour 4 eminent professionals: Professor Alan Phillips, Professor Peter Higgins, Adam Brinkworth and Kevin Brennan from Brinkworth. We would like to award the honour of Practitioner Fellows of the Learned Society, and you 4 will be our first 4 Practitioner Fellows, and we thank you for that. We feel it's very important to honour these 4 people due to the way that for many, many years they have contributed to practice, education and research and have shown a huge commitment to this discipline. We look forward to their further contribution in the years to come, and from a very personal point of view, as I know all 4 of them, I'd just like to say massive congratulations and thank you very much, and we look forward to working with you much more in the future. I'd like to hand you back now to Leighton, Mr. Leighton Reid. Thank you.
It's a great honour to present these distinguished gentlemen today. Drew Plunkett, our first fellow, will now tell you a little bit about them and their achievements.
Thank you. Alan Phillips Architecture, or APA, which I can manage, it was founded in 1972. He might be our senior practitioner fellow. I think it's very interesting. As I say, I've got some quotes here from these fellows, and the first thing I think well, I should say about what Alan has said about APA is that he sees it as a community of building design professionals who subscribe to the ethos of that good design is a considered response to human need. Two things I think are important in that statement. One is the idea of the building design professionals, the community, because actually we do know very well that it's an interior, the activities we indulge in are not the result of one person's effort. They are the result of a team, and a team which goes beyond the immediate studio. And I think it is very important that people understand the importance of the other members of the team, respect the importance of the other members of the team. The other thing I want to pick out in that statement is the idea of a considered response to human need. Considered being the word. I think it's always very easy to assume that one is taking into consideration human needs. It's easy to gloss over them, of course. But I think when someone puts it in their shall we say, their ethos statement, that they make a considered response to it, I think that's important. That's the essence of what's happening. Alan's won awards for public buildings, for interior design, for furniture and research. And very interestingly, he's just recently set up, I think it's described as a sister practice, APZED, ZED standing for Zero Emission Design, which is obviously to do with sustainability and conservation. And their first project has got government research, government funding, so that it can be developed as a sustainability, exemplar of sustainability principles. The other thing I want to quote, the other thing I want to attribute to him is he's always believed in combining education with practice. And I think, again, that's why I think it's very appropriate that he's here today. Because I think, in a way, it is important, and practitioners do that. They recognize the mutual benefits. Not only is it a chance for them to spot talent early, but it's also a chance, I think, for them to refresh their batteries, if you like, to go in and to work with different minds, shall we say. And that's important. Almost at the end, the last quotation, when Alan's talking about what they do at APA, they're celebrating the best of the past in equal measure to an enthusiasm for future environments and for those who will come to enjoy them. I checked before I came in. One of the projects, I have a long memory. In fact, as I become increasingly senile, my long-term memory is becoming quite acute. And I do remember around about 1980, a project that Alan did, which was really high-end homo. I don't know if you know what homo is, postmodernism. I think it was very important. Around about 80, it kind of freed up the whole design profession from the kind of the somberness, the strictures of modernism. And that was particularly important for our interior designers, and maybe we'll talk about that some other time. But I think Alan did this extraordinary bar in Dundee, of all places, which was as full-on homo as you could possibly get. And I think that was very important because that was an incredibly exciting time. I remember it well. I treasure the memories of it. And, but I don't think you're going to show that tonight. We're going to show much more. He's going to show much more interesting. No, not much more interesting, much more modern stuff. So, Alan.
Can you hear me? Is it working? I'm not going to show anything, actually. I'm not going to show any of my work at all. I'm just going to talk a little bit about art. On May the 9th, 1899, the French architect Hector Guimard, architect and interior designer, furniture designer, industrial designer, gave an address to l'École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. I can get it almost right, I'll paraphrase slightly. He said to his audience of students in 1899 as follows: "I have an unfortunate passion," he said. "That is that I love architecture, and that I love it because in all of its manifestations it comprises every other art without exception." And that really gelled with me, and 66 years after that, fast forwarding, I was banging on the doors of Brighton Art College, going, let me in, let me in, let me in, I want to be part of this thing. 66 was an extraordinary time to want to be involved in the arts. But resonating in my mind was this thing about Guimard saying that there is this one thing, this discipline of architecture that holds together everything. Same with interior design. It is the only discipline, possibly, that comprises every art without exception. And more importantly, it's the only art that's inhabited. There is no other art that's inhabited. So it forms a very special place, and formed a very, very special place in my aspirations at that time. I banged on the door so loudly, having come from a farm in Sussex and not really ready for the world of art college in 1966. I banged so loudly they let me in. I wanted to study fine art because I thought that that's what I could do very well, because I started drawing very early in my life. I don't think there's anything that can take the place of being able to draw. But after a year I got thrown out of art school. I got thrown out of painting because I made a very visible demonstration of my distrust of two-dimensional representation of three-dimensional form, which ended up with me spending a term being accused of arson. And I got marched over to the architecture school. And they said, here's a lad that has torn all of his canvases up and set light to them, and we think maybe that he will be better suited to a three-dimensional expression of three-dimensional form rather than the former. And I went in having gone from all of my art-based people to people wearing jackets, strange jackets and corduroy trousers and looking rather dull. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed suddenly drawing three-dimensionally. But what I enjoyed more than that was thinking three-dimensionally, which is a lovely skill that you'll all, if you haven't already learned it, you will all learn to enjoy it. Thinking three-dimensional is like playing three-dimensional chess. It was an utterly beguiling activity. And in the first year, I was given 1 year, by the way, to prove myself. Otherwise, they were just going to throw me out. I'd be cast out into that wild world that was the 60s. But I enjoyed it enormously and began to draw furiously. We didn't have computers in those days, as you can imagine. Began to draw furiously and began to fill my notebooks up furiously and my sketchbooks up furiously and to travel furiously. Everything was this furious thing. And at the same time, the School of Architecture, and this is really, really important for where you are here in Ravensbourne, the School of Architecture was part of the School of Art. So when I got my first flat, I had as flatmates a graphic designer, an illustrator, myself as an architect, and a filmmaker. And you cannot imagine how exciting that must have been for my skill, or what I was learning to do as a skill, germinating, propagating amongst all these other skills. And as I've gone through my career, working in interior design and in architecture, and making movies, and doing some writing as well, I've seen the art college disappear. I've seen the death of the art college, and I think it's tragic, absolutely tragic. And do you know how many art colleges there are, possibly, left in this country that do a course in interior design and in architecture? Do you know how many there are? Maybe one. Do you know where that is? Maybe here. Maybe, just maybe, this might be the only bloody art college left in the entire country. I don't know. I know Canterbury's finished as an art college. They used to study architecture at Canterbury. I think that's gone. This might be, interestingly, and I just want to say this rather than showing my work, this might be the last place in the UK that has an art college environment across all of those creative disciplines that also educates with regards interior design and with regards architecture. I think it's extraordinary. I think it's absolutely extraordinary. So I'm going to flip this whole talk, I'm going to finish it, I'm going to flip this whole talk on its head. I'm going to say that Robin, who runs this school, is an extraordinarily brave and courageous and wonderful human being. And I'm also going to say that Leighton Reed is an extraordinarily brave and courageous human being, not only for sustaining Ravensbourne as a school of art, but for another much more important reason. That important reason is that there is a structure in Ravensbourne that allows, because I'm a visiting fellow at Bath, for instance, up your arse Ponce School of Architecture, that will only take 4 A levels at A star before you even get onto Pile A. Pile B, never learn Pile A. But it's good, and there's a very high standard of architecture, but no architectural intelligence. This, I think, in addition to being possibly the only school left in the country where architecture and interior design can coexist within an art college, is a unique insofar as providing a pathway into architecture for those people who wouldn't normally qualify for those academic institutes that teach at another level, not a better level, but a different level. So I just want to finish by saying, well done to Robin, well done to Ravensbourne, but actually more importantly than all of that, well done to Leighton Reed for sticking with it, for getting this course going, and for continuing with it. I think it's wonderful. The pathway that he has constructed allows people, sometimes of extraordinarily disadvantaged and underprivileged backgrounds, to have an equal opportunity for an education in architecture. I think we should be congratulated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. I'm now going to talk briefly about Brinkworth. Brinkworth the entity, not Brinkworth the person. I'm always rather amazed when I realise how long Brinkworth have been in existence, because I think the thing that kind of confuses me really is that the partners retain some kind of extraordinary and intimidating vitality almost, an enthusiasm which I find rather intimidating. In fact, both sort of strangely youthful, you can see for yourself. I think that it's very fitting though that we have them here, because so much of practice is about partnerships. Sometimes with senior partners, sometimes with a junior partner, you've got relationships like that. But from what I can decipher, there's a strange equitable equality there. And actually, on separate occasions, I've spoken to each of them confidentially and more or less invited them to dish the dirt on the other. And they're very sound on that, and nothing passes their lips. I was very sound, and I look forward to what you have to say. But I think that, there's always that mystery of what makes a successful partnership. And I've always sort of maintained it has to be people with complementary skills. People who, one gets busy and one does the work, one does a certain kind of work, one backs up and fills in the gaps. And with these two, I'm not so sure really, because I think both are fairly strong, both personalities and also in the contribution they make to the output of the office. So they're different in many ways in the data background as furniture. Kevin comes from he's got an impeccable interior lineage. He's worked with Ben Kelly, he's worked with Julian Pollock, and he's worked with other people that one could think are perhaps not quite as distinguished as those. But there's a good mix there, but somehow it comes together and it makes a whole. In fact, it's a great example, I think, of something being more than some parts possibly. They have the confidence to coexist, and that's very important. And I think they have the confidence and therefore the ability to venture beyond some of the natural boundaries that one get created in practice. The practice is extraordinarily successful. And I looked, and again, the extensive research I was doing, I checked out the website, of course, and there's nothing much on the website that I can repeat. It's actually just an incredible collection of extraordinary projects. But there's a very fascinating map of where the projects have happened, and it's a kind of, you want to identify the sort of the interesting, sophisticated, the progressive parts of the world. They've got a dot there. But there's two fascinating dots. Some are in Central Asia, and I don't even know what country that is, but they're getting there as well. And no doubt Central Asia will be full of little red dots this time next year. I think they've done incredible hospitality projects, they've done great office workplace projects, they've done extraordinary residential projects. But I think probably they are best known for retail. And I think retail, people are a bit peculiar about retail, but I've always rather admired retail designers because I think there's two things about retail. The most important one, the most dramatic, I think, is that you know if you've done well because you can see it in the sales figures. But I think also people forget that it's actually the high street, it's retail, it's the shop. That's what keeps economies turning over. And it's not just the economy of this country, it's not just the people who own the shop. It's actually the people who manufacture wherever they manufacture. It's about the people who produce the raw materials. But there's got to be an outlet for that. There's got to be the place where that becomes money. And I think that's where retail, people do not realize, people refuse to accept how important that aspect is. And what an important aspect of that is of the work as interior designers do. So I will always salute the retail designer, because I think not only have you got this terrible moment when the sales figures are there to be scrutinized, but I think also you've got to be, I think, what designers really should be, which is objective. It's not about doing what you want to do and doing what you did last time, repeating yourself endlessly. You have to have a kind of an understanding for what the appropriate, what is appropriate for whatever customer base you're working for, which is also true about the other kind of areas in which they work. But I think there's no point, people talk a lot about research, that kind of research after the event. There's a colleague of mine who's not here at the moment, she's made a very important point. Research can be a bit like looking in the mirror. What you see is what's behind you. You don't see in front of you. And I think a good retail designer, a good designer actually of any variety, they're shaping the future. They have to have their, I was going to say they have to have their finger on the pulse, but they don't. They have to sort of be, I have to know what happened just before the pulse beach, you know. It's what shapes it, and everything's got to move on, and that's what designers do. I think one last comment I'd like to bring about, I think it's probably true to say there's no house style, and that used to be, that probably still is my definition of a great designer. And I think, you know, you see a project, I think that's an extraordinary project. I wonder who did it. You find out somebody knows, and they'll say, it was Brinkberg, and then you say, of course. Because I think that's the extraordinary thing, that while there may not be a lifestyle, that there's a core kind of quality in the work. So, you can spill the beans now. You know what that
Thank you very much, Drew. Can you hear me? I'll just quickly introduce to say that we were asked to show a couple of images of something that inspired us, or some of the reasons we might be here today, and to describe what we do. We thought it'd be much more interesting. You know, what we talked here a little while ago, Kevin and I, and we spoke about finished projects and showed finished projects. Today you won't see any finished projects. We're just going to show you the actual business of doing it, and we're going to just take it in turns to hand back this microphone to one another and make a couple of points about a few different stages, and then I hope at the end we'll cheer you up with something festive. So, first slide, please. We've chosen to put both of our influences on one sheet in a way of togetherness. And Kevin's on the left-hand side.
Well, it was interesting. Alan started off in 1966. I think I was 65. Sorry. Mine started really well. When I started becoming alert to everything was really the Face magazine, and I've chosen a few things that that got me sort of a certain attitude. There's a seminal exhibition at the Hayward, which is the Corbusier Architect of the Century, which I was more interested in because of the models that were made, and then L.E. Farrelly's seminal New Spirit sort of argument about the end of postmodernism, and I don't think it mentioned your bar in there, Alan, but it's an amazing piece, and also Factory Records and the Hacienda, which is loads of lost weekends in there, and it's just that new spirit, that sort of punk attitude, and the idea, took it all back to basic art school education of Dadaism and reevaluating all the time, and finally I settled with a relationship with Anne.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a very meaningful relationship. As we're here in the college, I thought I'd start with a mentor. So I hope you were guessing, who's that architect or that furniture designer, interior designer? The guy with the big nose is an incredible tutor that I had at Wolverhampton. And he finished the Royal College of Art in 1969. And he did transport design. And he left on a motorbike that he designed. And I've got a lovely photograph of him, long hair, with his fingers out. And he's still got that motorbike. But I put Bill in here. His name's Bill Fielden, and he's an incredible human being. And he really, he inspired me when I was 23, when I first met him. He pulled up at college in a matte black Cortina, massive sideburns, big quiff. Afraid the quiff's not there anymore. The sideburns are still there, they're much whiter than they used to be. And even today, he sent me a great set of photographs of things he's making, building, designing, hot rods, motorbikes, painting, a whole series of different disciplines that he was moving across. The next piece I was going to talk about was bowls. The picture at the bottom, I feel incredibly lucky that I was a kid in the mid-70s when skateboarding first came properly to the UK. And this was a space called Rolling Thunder. It was in Brentford, and it was an old Victorian warehouse. It was the largest skateboard in Europe. And as a kid, I couldn't believe it when I first walked into there. This great big curvaceous space. It surrounded you in every way, that you could have great fluid, fun ways, you could fly in there, you could, it was very, very inspiring, and I still love to go to interesting skateboard parks and skate around. So I think that's been very informative to me. And lastly, I put a Charles Eames chair, and you've all seen Charles Eames chair, so I tried to stick in a production one. This is less about the Charles Eames chair, and I've stopped banging on about what the technology was. The point I wanted to make about a chair, because I studied furniture design originally, so I'm a fake interior designer. We were going to joke, I was a furniture designer as a fake interior designer. Kevin's actually an interior designer, he's a fake architect as well. But the chair, there's no escaping a three-dimensional object. There's something very special about that to me. Be it a building, be it a chair. There's no escaping the truth of a real object, the materiality, and the fact that you can walk around it and look at it, sit on it, be in it. So, next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to Kevin now. Some unfinished stuff.
Yeah, this is just a slide that's showing, what we're about as a community, which is just, a really nice word that Alan used. And, we don't run an office, we run a studio, and, it's all about drawing. It's all about ideas and how they manifest themselves into sort of, we take a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of investors in what we do. When we do an interior, we do a shop, we do a house or gallery, whatever we're looking to. There's a lot of investment in it, and we take those partnerships really seriously. But the initial thing starts in the studio, and it is all about ideas and how those things, we, as designers and makers or architects, as we pretend to be sometimes, we don't have the benefit of actually building them. As a graphic design discipline, you can produce a piece of flat work. As a photographer and artwork, even furniture, you can produce a prototype. But as interior and spatial designers, we have to sell ideas through drawing and a certain attitude and a way of describing a journey or, some transition through spaces through communication. And this slide just sort of really just shows you that we're, you know, even though we're grown-ups and we've moved on and there's employers and all that sort of stuff, it's still sort of an art-based discipline, which we're, you know, we're keen to sort of keep that art school tradition alive in that sense.
My points on this are, this initial stage is the bit where are you going, what is the project? It's that initial stage, like an early relationship with something that's really exciting, dreaming, and then also the dread of where will it become, what the expectations of it. My point, we've shown a lot of drawings there, and I was just going to make a quick point about drawings. I love this early stage where there's loose drawings and tight drawings, be that hand-drawn or, you know, full construction packs. And something about the drawing is very, very important. And yeah, actually from a loose drawing to a tight drawing, that's the truth. And when you travel somewhere else in the world or down the road to look at a project, the truth is in the information you give people. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide.
This is just like pictures you probably don't ever see, and it's, you know, it's about that process. There's various projects from an office to holding up a listed building, reservoir conversion, and, you know, a skate bowl under the Westway. And it, you know, these are the bits that we really enjoy. And I think I met Adam dozens of years ago, and he, you know, he came from he actually was involved in making these things. I used to work for my brother as a builder before I got shouted out by him, and I asked who shouts at him. He told me he's the architect. So I said, well, I want his job. So my roots are still in building, I think, and actually getting your hands dirty and getting involved in site is really because we understand the processes of making and form making and structural engineering. I think we can have an empathy with the contractor. We can see them through it. We understand their grief and their strain and all the things that they take on board to sort of deliver those drawings that you saw earlier.
What I like about this stage is the quickness of it. It's a bit like building a sandcastle. You get to knock it down really quickly. The early stages of shell and demolition, you get really quick results. And if you're, well, actually this really scares me. There's a picture of one of the houses Kevin's designed, which is the bottom left-hand one. It's not very clear from the photographs. That's a really, really large house standing on a hole that we've dug all the way down, all the way to the back of the garden. And that's, for me, very, very exciting. Who doesn't like going on a building site? Of course, it's very exciting. And this is ground, this is the shell works if it was an interior. This is the groundworks if it's a building, and those are the first foundation stages. I love to strip a building back to its nakedness. You always discover something. And then you can then set your ideas and make sure they fit. So that stage, this bit, is very, very, very exciting to us. Next slide, please.
This bit is really about when it gets down to that finer detail, you know. It's just that, you know, prototyping in a sense. You know, if it's on the bottom right, it's some containers. And I think because our background in making, we understand material, we know how things work. And so that bottom right slide is, a lot of people have seen it, but when Heidegger offer you 5 containers and they say, you know, do what we want from you, we have that authority, or whatever the word is, that we know that won't work. But we have the, you know, the nonce to sort of go and find someone who can make a container for us as bespoke. And it's just that attention, it's just that getting involved in prototyping and making is really, you know, when you're at art school, you get 14 weeks or so to come up with some idea. In the real world, sounds sort of really tossy about it, you get a couple of weeks, and then the actual manufacturing process is much longer. So those relationships with makers and workshops and trying to find a process that suits the budget, suits the criteria, suits the sort of the project or fits with the attitude of what you want to sort of convey is very important to us. And making is such an important part. Once things leave the drawing board, it's in process quite quickly. And we've forged loads of relationships over the years across the country where we can go to very specific makers to make our projects come to fruition. and give the client that confidence that we know what we're on about.
So this is manufacture and prefabrication. It's the stuff that doesn't happen on the site, it happens somewhere else. The piece I was going to say about what I love about this is that workshop moment. There is a creative discovery through actually just doing it. There's things you'd never think about when you're sitting in the studio with someone else, when you're actually physically next to someone, and you think, oh, you know what, your machine can do this, or if I turn that chair around the other way, it might be able to be something completely different. Also, that collaborative nature, you're sitting with somebody who's put things together far more than you have, and you can turn around and say, you know what, I've got a better way of doing this. And if you listen sometimes, rather than be arrogant or dogmatic, I've learned loads of stuff from people making things, that real craft and that expertise and brilliance. That's what I was going to say. Next slide, please.
This is, this is the bit before you sort of hand it over to the client, and sort of those relationships that you've tightly forged with your team and those collaborations with your makers finally get to the point where you hand it over, and I think it was, I don't know if it was Alan or Steve Donald, and it is the beginning. This is where the project starts, in a sense. It's the beginning of it, and it's when you sort of you give birth to it, in a sense. It's you've gone through the stresses, and it's a nice moment in time where you let go and then you move on. And Drew's lovely words to us: we don't have a house style. And you can see that in this sort of kaleidoscope of images for different projects. But, there is one consistency here, and it's that sort of attention to detail, that delivering on time, on budget, making sure the client's happy, and then handing their baby over, and hopefully retaining that relationship to go on and sort of do better things and, take advantage of better opportunities that come up.
So for me, this bit, again, no finished projects. It's the craziness at the end, where everything comes together. It's the collaborative piece of an all-trade situation. It's where you can start to sense check before the product comes in, before whatever it is that its function is. You've got the last chance to check that thing worked well. I'm excited about that. That bit was dreadful. Shit, what should we do about that? And so really for me, it's the vitality of that, where everything just starts to come together as a finished piece, and then that critical piece, which is just quite crazy. I like this picture of Foot Patrol, little project in the bottom right hand, where there's just the Hoover's still there. All of this stuff is still happening, and I think that's the last slide of our work. So thank you very much for listening to us. I haven't finished yet. There's going to be one last little thing. This was about collaboration. It was about showing you unfinished things. So please don't roll it yet. Before I show you this movie, and it only takes a minute, this is also a collaborative piece. It's also unfinished. It's a Christmas card, and it's the first rough cut. It's got the wrong tune. It's got a fantastic painter called Nico, who's the ornamental conifer, which is the bar and the ladder. It was cut by Max Cutting, a young filmmaker we did, and this was our first go at a little Christmas card that arrived as a movie. So, yeah, please roll it.
Time
Thank you very much. Most enjoyable. Christmas card. Now I want to talk a little bit about Peter Higgins of Land Design Studio. Land Design Studio was founded in 1992. Before that, Peter had worked in film and in television, and indeed had imagination. The way they now describe Land Design Studio, it's a cross-disciplinary design consultancy, and say that we tell stories in cultural and commercial spaces through the integration of interior design, architecture, scenography, and communication media. I think that happily we're beginning to see a kind of a theme emerging here, which is certainly consolidated the idea of cross-discipline and integration and collaboration. In 2009, Peter was made the role of designer for industry, which is, I suppose, it is maybe the highest accolade available in the field of the design disciplines. I just want to go back to the quotation or aspects of the quotation again before handing over. I mean, I think if you read anything that Peter's written or said and has been reported, there's the recurring references to narrative, both in the conception meeting. I mean, what I think it's saying is really that to create something, you need to know where it's going, how it's going to join together, what it's about, what story it has to tell. And that continues through the development of projects, a kind of a narrative for a narrative, I suppose. The other thing which I think is very important, he talks about identifying the audience, or I suppose the audience or the consumer. Well, I was very taken and grateful to have read his pronouncement on the empty gestures that are iconic buildings. And I was using the word iconic very ironically there. But I think what he says is that they're empty gestures because they're really about histrionic facades. They're not about the content, they're not about the experience people have in them. They're not about the immediate location in which they operate. They kind of just make statements, they turn their back on the bits that are going to give them a sustained existence. I think the other thing, which is, again, very important, he's used the word, he's talked about the importance, I suppose, of interlopers and intersectors, meaning people who move across boundaries, who really, I suppose, also, I'm trying to think of the appropriate word, interfere is not quite the right word, but there's a lot of inters and interlopers, but interject, I suppose, interact with both with the people that they're designing for, but more importantly, they interact with other disciplines. They make a richer mix. They produce a hybrid, and I think that's again a theme that's been emerging this evening. I know interior educators, we do spend a lot of time agonizing about the nature of the discipline and the parameters of the discipline. I'm afraid I'm rather hard-lined and small-minded about it, but I'm very conscious that indeed there is a serious, and I probably should stop making the counter arguments, because even if I made it now, I'd be contradicting a few moments. So, Peter, to you.
Thank you, Drew. Imposter, I think is the word. Could we just first get the first slide? This is, I'm afraid, a slide fest. I can never get the slides down to the number that I need. Apologies for that. So Millie, I'll just give you that kind of, and we'll move on. I was giving a talk somewhere and talking about my passion for architecture and placemaking and media, and And then I decided I needed a series of slides that introduced and tried to understand why I was coming and where I was coming from. And it's interesting that everybody on the platform, we haven't spoken at all. And you know what? We're talking about the same things. Where do we come from? What's our inspiration? And what is this collaborative process? It's uncanny that we're all saying the same thing. And seriously, we had no connectivity at all. Living in a new town, I was in a social experiment. I didn't know it at the time, and it was a wonderful, we were in the middle of the 60s. As a kid, it was a big cultural revolution. None of us knew we were in it at the time. Alan and I were speaking about it. My school was demolished because it wasn't fit for purpose within 50 years. It was a brand new school in 1959, demolished around 2000. It was named after Sir Thomas Bennett, who was an architect of the town. How ironic is that? His school was not fit for purpose, and that's what happened to it. Next. The jump cut from that wonderful comprehensive school, it was wonderful. It was a really big experimental school, part of the experiment of a new town. So everything was running in parallel. You know, there were lots of interesting people teaching at the school, and I never did any art. For some reason or other, I never had any background. I never did at any level any art, and the only place I could have gone to was the Architectural Association, because you could blag your way in. And if anything I'd learned to do at that comprehensive school was to blag. It made me very, very streetwise. And somehow I jumped into this place that was full of unbelievable people, thinkers, Archigram. I proceeded, Zaha did, and Nigel Coates, I think, but you know, Norman Foster and Richard Rogers were teaching there. But again, I didn't know. I didn't know what was this Centre of Pompidou that this guy Rogers was working on. Buildings were walking. Ron Heron was drawing this stuff on his kitchen table, you know. And next one. And from there, when I left, I went and worked in television and theatre at the BBC as a production designer, because there was no work in architecture. It was the days when we had a 3-day week. There was no work in architecture, and I just slipped into this kind of scenographic world, and it seemed to be relevant. And I suddenly found the value of the written word, the scripted space, you know, creating space for camera, lighting, and performance using props, talking to a cinematographer. You know, so the whole language was different from my architectural training. Move on. Building a set for a Bangladeshi community and Tim Roth, King of the Ghetto in Brick Lane. You know, this was about trying to give a sense of atmosphere and a sense of narrative, and I'll use that word, of storytelling, by making a barrier, by painting a brick wall, by dressing a set, by using pieces from the Quran, you know, trying to understand and adopt a culture that I didn't understand at all by talking to people, bringing it to life, bringing the script to life. Next one. And then hijacked the heady days of headhunting and utterly, unbelievably walked away from this wonderful kind of world of theatre and architecture, theatre and television, and worked in this monster of a place, imagination, where we were launching cars and telecommunications. The next one, lifting that geodesic dome, just lifting a 30-metre dome to reveal an exhibition outside of it, you know. So understanding the brand, understanding the audience that Drew referred to. Next one. So I drew a diagram, the 10-year diagram, and if we move on from that, the next one, and that's the diagram, and it's very simple, and what it does is it reflects that journey. It reflects where is it, what's the architecture, what's the story, and why do we tell it, what's the narrative, what's the script. You know, written word was something that was very important to me. As designers, we're scared of the written word, and we shouldn't be. How do we tell it? Communication, media, and who is it for? The visitor profile. So that Venn diagram, which has this kind of captured audience, has become our absolute kind of our organising principle. Next one. So placemaking, and this is really next one. This is really trying to understand, and I just captured images that have inspired me. And the next one, this is Chernobyl, radioactive kind of, and I just went there with some friends, and just this city that had been left behind because of one day. They got on the coaches and they left there wasn't any destruction. This is all caused by ransacking, actually. This isn't anything to do with the radioactivity. It is partly radioactive, but it was left behind. this 70s city that everybody walked away from. The cat was left in the corner, the dinner was on the table. They said, don't worry, you'll be back in 3 days. And they bussed them out. And they didn't come back. And I guess the dinner got cold, or the cat ate it, and then this happened. It was ransacked by second hand by scrap metal dealers who distributed radioactive material right through the Ukraine. Wonderful. Next one. And Aykroyd and Harvey. Now, who's making place here? This is Aykroyd and Harvey planting the fly tower of the National Theatre. And there's Dan on the left-hand side watering the wall, you know. Spectacular. So who's making place here? Is this an architect? No, this is an artist who's planting a wall. And the next one. And this is the Tate, this wonderful piece in the Tate, this memorable experience in the Tate with using a mirrored ceiling and half a sun that created the full sun. People laid on the floor and they felt almost the heat from this virtual sun. A spectacular piece of placemaking made by an artist, another artist. This is Barbara Hepworth's garden in St Ives. You know, this wonderful tranquility. The life and times of this woman are told by just being there, just by being in this planted space. Next one. This is Lozano Hemmer, who makes space with light. You could actually log on the internet to these searchlights in Mexico City, and you could real-time from anywhere in the world point the lights. You could make a light show from your computer, and you could watch it on the webcam. That's placemaking. That's the Digerati making place. This is Helen Marriage and Artichoke making place with an elephant that walks through the city. You know, how did they ever get that through health and safety? You know, it's mesmerising. That actually happened in London, and you could ride on the characters that were with it. It's an event. It's event makers making place. Next one. Jodrell Bank. We did some work at Jodrell Bank, and I would drive there, and you had to turn your mobile phone off before you went in. There was a kind of mystery to it. It was a sense of the science fiction. And now they have concerts there, and they actually beam stuff from outer space, and they have music events there with this magnificent piece of engineering. This was never designed to be a sculptural event. This was never designed to be part of a musical event. It was designed as a radio telescope, but it's just appropriated that space, and it's just made it very exciting to be there. And the next one. And this incredible initiative from Marx Barfield to build this thing, to make this thing happen, to get this thing funded from literally a sketch and an idea. From scratch, these architects made it happen. They got the funding, they got round the planning, they suspended it over the river. There's all sorts of issues about this never ever happening, but it happened. The next one. And this plays Louvre, and I just took this photograph because it's a section through an idea. You know, the idea that the culture sits on the top and the retail sits underneath. And again, you know, a piece of architecture that actually goes further than it probably ever imagined it would do. So, next one. And Eden Project down in Cornwall. This is the brainchild of Tim Schmidt, who's an entrepreneur, you know, who's in the music business, who discovered all these lost gardens in Cornwall and decided he would make the ultimate horticultural ecological centre. And he flew over Cornwall for a year trying to find the right place. And this next one, the chalk pit, was suitable, and the architecture and the engineer reflected this ambition of this man. And as you drive in 5 hours from London, the business plan doesn't work, but it does work. You enter this kind of James Bond setting, you know, the kind of glorification of architecture and engineering. And actually it tells a story. It tells us about our ecologies. Next one. And the work of scenographic, of production designers. You know, the idea that you can actually start with an image, a beautifully rendered image of what you want to build, and the next one, and then you build it. And this is Shanghai being built in Bangkok. But that idea that you can start with the image of what you want, that's what storyboard artists do. You don't work it up, you don't nurture it, you just go in with both feet, and then you've just got to build it. Next one. So collaboration. At the Maritime Museum in Cornwall, we work really closely with a really cultured American architect, M.J. Long, who had this ambition to try and create an end piece to this little kind of estuary town in Cornwall, in Falmouth. And the next one. And she made a kind of boat shed, and she gave it a tower, and it had a vernacular of slightly, you know, the east coast of the States, which is where she comes from. And our job was for 5 years to make the inside out work, and that's what we did. In the next one, we made that function of this whole building and piecing together the sequence of events in this building. We made it work concurrently with the architect, with the engineers, with the way the building was ventilated, how the building was naturally lit, how we didn't give you windows when we didn't want you to look out. Next one. And how we, from our model, we informed the idea that this flotilla of boats would actually be sailing through the space with a backdrop, almost a backdrop of a hull of a much bigger tanker. Actually made to imply, but it didn't matter, there was kind of symbolism in the solution, and the integrity of the movement system and the ramping and the flotilla, and the next one. And the idea that this very peaceful installation could be rehung every year. You could rehang the boats as if they were paintings. And the next one. And this is just a little movie of how. Is there any sound? Go back. And the idea that these boats are actually wound, they're wound into these screens. So you actually choose a boat and you wind it using a boating winch, stainless steel boating winch. You wind the blueprint of all of those structures in front of you, those boats in front of you, and you find the one you want to find out about. So you wind it into your screen. So you engage with it emotionally. Next one. You engage with the object emotionally, so the cognitive engagement, it means that you're more interested in it. It means the interactivity has a kind of, it has a relationship with the actual, with the emotion of you actually drawing it into the screen. So you start to allow the mechanism, the technology to support that cognitive process of learning about an object. And this is working with Wilkinson Eyre and Pringle Brandon at the Mary Rose Museum, which opens next week in Portsmouth. Next one. And here we've got half the Tudor ship, which sank in front of Henry VIII, and half the hull broke away, half of it remained filled up with silt. It's the best collection of Tudor objects, obviously, anywhere in the world. And because they were all preserved, because of the condition of the boat when it was covered in silt, when it was raised in 1980, 84, we've now got a story about Tudor England, not only the hull, but the object to tell that story, half the hull. So what we did, next one, what we did is we actually built a facsimile or a copy of the hull. So a bit like the Damien Hirst cow, you pass between the real hull and an ersatz or a copy of the hull. Next one, within which we can put the object, because the real hull is too fragile. So there's a suspension of you being between the virtual and the real. But this is brought to life with objects that have no interpretation at all. They just sit in the right place, so it's contextualised in the objects. Next one. And that's the hull with the last bit of drying mechanism. They're drying it very slowly, and it gets eventually dried by 2016. Next one. And the UK Pavilion in Aichi in Japan, where we had a budget of a tenth of the size of Heatherwick's, but this was never going to be a sculptural event. This was going to be a interpreted story of how British scientists learn from nature, how important nature, the wisdom of nature is to us, and our task was to bring that to life, effectively in space which was 280 square metres. We had to tell the story of 6 stories, and we had 35,000 visitors a day to 250 square metres. So we created these, really smart, working with fantastic software designers. We created these very quick hit, these 30-second stories that could be told by you interacting. Next one. And how you could actually enjoy, this is early sketches, next one. How you could, just hold that, how you could enjoy and understand the story very quickly by interacting, but how others, passive interactors, could actually gather around and enjoy the story with you. If you just look at the back screen, that filigree screen is made up of punching holes in ply of 6 indigenous leaves from the UK. Next one. And there's a very quick movie showing the story of tidal energy. So the story of tidal energy is discovered by turning the handle, which is the moon. It's an orrery, the moon moving around the Earth. And as you do that, you draw the digital story towards you, which leaves messages. And the next one. So the souvenir, the takeaway from our pavilion was the residue of the holes that were punched in the filigree walls that surrounded the space, both the garden as well. So we eventually found that this was such a cherished souvenir for the Japanese, because they love things like this, that we didn't have enough and had to make card ones, but these ended up on eBay. Next one. And the collaborative process in Singapore, where we worked with, and this happens often, that you get huge client groups which are very, very difficult to manage. But what was spectacular in Singapore was that this was conceived by a landscape architect, next one, Andrew Grant in Bath, who then joined with Wilkinson Eyre, who did the two big conservatories, which are counterintuitive conservatories because we have to take the humidity out of them so they're cool and temperate. They're not hot houses like we're getting here, which is back to front. And then these wonderful super trees designed by Atelier 1, Atelier 10, structural and mechanical engineers, with us just kind of following up at the rear as interpretive designers. So this wonderful 6-year journey working in this really big, and one has to say UK-centric group, funded to the tune of £500 million to provide a visitor attraction in downtown, effectively downtown Singapore. Next one. This is the nighttime view of these super trees designed by Atelier 1, that actually gather water, photovoltaics, that you can grow up them, and they actually light themselves based on the energy that they receive during the day. Next one. And inside one of the conservatories, we've got a mountain with growth on the outside of the mountain. And collaboratively, next one, we were able to create a show inside, which actually demonstrates, next one, the impact of the potential impact of climate change if the temperature increases by 5 degrees over a period of time, which is pretty devastatingly frightening. So our job, not necessarily to frighten the visitor, but just to make people aware through using immersive media. Next one. And at the British Museum, working on Pompeii and Herculaneum, a very prosaic and a very simple solution using kind of old-fashioned techniques of model making, where I really enjoyed in my sort of theatre and cinema days of actually finding out through the three-dimensional model how I might interpret the brief from the curator, which was to drop the objects in the context of a Roman villa just 30 minutes before the devastation of the volcano. So the idea of trying to create a Roman villa, that footprint of a Roman villa, to tell the stories through the wonderful objects, and that was the simplicity of the brief, and just trying to fit that into the round reading room. Next one was the task. Next one. So you can see here, this is where the object becomes the star, and our job is to contextualize them or bring them to life. Next one. And then nearly there. This is Ted, not TEDx. This is Ted V. This is Ted Vincent, who is what, a fellow? Ted Vincent? Yeah. And this is just a reminder about where you are and what the interior educators are all about, and how, as an interloper, how important it's been to me to be invited into this very. No, go back. Can you go? Just run the movie. You just go that, and there's a final movie here. This is a movie that we made with Squint Opera as for a pitch in Abu Dhabi, and it's about avatars that may follow you around in the museum. It's about using alpha waves where we can actually track what you enjoy and what you like and play it back to you on a secondary journey. And it's about this is a library where you can drag information from the walls, from the cases, and interpret that information. It's a completely head-banging movie which we made for the client. And we didn't get the job, of course, because you get epilepsy through watching it. But I think it's about spending £30,000 on a movie, which is what this cost. And how we're driven to do that, and what comes out of it, because what comes out of it is a kind of Hollywood-style presentation. It's quite an extraordinary exercise that you're kind of forced to go through. And does the sound gone? So I would scroll through this, but we just go into the next space. Okay, we've finished there, because I'll come back to Charles Eames, who's an inspiration. And I think what's really interesting, and why it's a really good end slide, is that Adam was inspired by a piece of furniture from Charles Eames, and I'm inspired by a piece of filmmaking by Charles Eames, The Powers of 10. So how smart were the Eames? Thank you.